players on the screen now. That's Zheyuan on your left and Baris on your right. So both players just settling in, getting ready to play it out here. And, you know, I think the teams they've bought could be really interesting. I know Baris has a number of friends that he does some team building with. And to see that kind of pattern of team building coming together, the way that he plays the team a little differently to his friends and his team building friends, you know, is always interesting. I think his style may differ to somebody like Marcus or Wolf, who I know he team builds with. And that's something that I'd love to see come to the fore in this day too. All players playing up to their own style.
Yeah, you know, we did see Wolf play twice yesterday on stream. It makes me wonder if he's going to be running a similar team to Wolf since, you know, presumably they work together preparing for this event, or if he's really going to just do his own thing.
Well, last year at the World Championships, Wolf, Marcus and Baris all worked together on a team, and they took it to a number of positions in that top cut. So we'll be curious to see if they've all gone for the same thing. I know a lot of players have different ideas, and particularly in this format, there's been a lot of ideas bouncing around right before the World Championships. Zheyuan had some very, very good play in his regionals run that we were at, and I'd love to see if he can carry on that momentum. It's a bit of a step up in tournament, so from a smaller tournament coming right up to the World Championships, that's going to be the kind of ask for him here. He needs to make sure he can translate that play onto the bigger stage.
All right, well, best of luck to Zheyuan. Best of luck to Baris. It looks like these trainers are getting ready to jump into team preview. Baris making sure he can take his notes. Sometimes, you know, it's hard to find a pen, but it's always nice to know that you have one with you. And now that we're in team preview, let's break down these teams. Zheyuan's going to be on the left-hand side of your screen, and he is running a team of Tapu Koko, Snorlax, Clefable, Garchomp, Celesteela, and Arcanine versus Baris' team of Tapu Koko, Arcanine, Garchomp, Celesteela, Ninetales, and Snorlax. So something very different from what we saw yesterday from Wolf.
Well, the one thing I'm really interested in here is actually the two kind of options we have for Protect the Snorlax. If we look over at Baris' team, he's got that nice Ninetales that can bring Aurora Veil with it. And with that in mind, it makes that Arcanine, or the Snorlax, really, really hard to deal with. Of course, if you're looking to deal with the Snorlax with physical attackers, such as Snorlax, such as Garchomp, such as Arcanine, he also has the Arcanine to keep it safe. If we go on over to Zheyuan's side, you know, he has a number of options to keep his Snorlax safe as well. And both players reverting to this Celesteela. It's a Pokemon that got a lot of attention early in the season, and now we see two in the same game. I'd very, very briefly like to touch on how it came to the fore, because really, it wasn't a popular Pokemon at the beginning of the format. Not because it wasn't good, because it took games to time. That was really something that players were concerned about, and playing that slow game is very, very difficult. Personally, I think when we get to the slow play towards the end of a game, it's super important that you map out the game. You think multiple steps ahead. If you're using Leech Seed, are they going to switch out? And if so, will you have the partner Pokemon to Celesteela to deal with that switch? It's so, so important to basically play a couple of turns ahead. Similar to how some people play chess, I think that's very, very important and a very translatable skill.
All right, well, here we go. Best of luck to both Zheyuan and Baris as we move forward into game one of round one of Swiss. Zheyuan leading the Tapu Koko and Arcanine combination that we've seen throughout this year versus Baris' lead of, hey, Tapu Koko and Arcanine.
It's been an ever-present lead this year. Tapu Koko and Arcanine working together. The one thing they don't like is Garchomp, but we don't see that from either player in this lead. That could be an adaptation to bear in mind for games 2 or 3. All of the Intimidates going off now. Interesting to note that Baris' did actually activate first, so that could be an indication on the Arcanine speed. And in the same vein, we have to take a moment to talk about Zheyuan's Tapu Koko. With the alternate color Tapu Koko, we do know it's a timid nature. That means if he's invested in speed, he will be potentially at max speed. And that's something that Baris now knows. He doesn't have to give up information unless he decides to attack the Tapu Koko. They both go for the same turn. And if Baris' goes first, then you know it's matching the speed. Usually when people run these timid Tapu Koko, it's all about going first. It's so, so important to basically get that damage down with an offensive Pokemon like Tapu Koko.
It makes you wonder, though, why you would choose to run the alternative color if you weren't comfortable with your opponent knowing that right off the bat. Arcanine leaving the field, Garchomp taking its place on Baris' side, and that Tapu Koko using Protect, so it will move first, but that's due to Protect's priority rather than anything else. Arcanine with a Protect of its own on Zheyuan's side of the field, and that Tapu Koko is left attacking into the Garchomp, I believe.
Yes, a very smart switch there from Baris. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the turn, this lead is really good for Garchomp. Of course, you have Earthquake, then you're able to attack both Tapu Koko and Arcanine for super effective damage. And most importantly, Baris has got it in safely, which is usually a bit of an ask for Garchomp. Got it in safely so he can do all of its damage. It's not been affected by the Intimidate from the lead. So that switch into the Thunderbolt from Zheyuan, very, very smart play from Baris. Now what he needs to do, because the Tapu Koko did protect the previous turn, he may be forced into a switch to allow him to Earthquake freely, unless he decides to go for a Tectonic Rage if he's carrying the Ground EMZ, which would only knock out one of his Pokemon. We do see the Garchomp immediately leaving though, so thinking maybe Zheyuan may have an answer for it.
Yeah, Celesteela is the one that takes the place of that Garchomp on the field. Usually if the Celesteela were to switch in, that would be an indication of an Earthquake, but Zheyuan happy to send out a Garchomp of his own. We get a Z move anyways. It looks like it's going to be a Gigavolt Havoc from Baris' Tapu Koko.
Yes, Baris' Tapu Koko looking to deal some damage, and with that switching from the Garchomp, you have to hope he didn't go for it, which he did. That is a wasted Z move from Baris there.
Yes, and Tapu Koko as well, unable to attack that turn.
Yeah, I believe the Tapu Koko going for the Sky Drop, that would be a move that wouldn't activate because trying to lift a Pokemon like Celesteela isn't possible. It's just too heavy for that Pokemon. So overall, I think a dead turn, but most importantly, with no damage down in that turn, Baris reveals the Z Crystal on his Tapu Koko, and he doesn't get any damage out of it. This is something I harp on about all the time. When you use your Z move, you need to get the maximum value out of it. That's something that really, really needs to be done. And when you attack into a ground type with an Electrium Z Gigavolt Havoc, you're not getting any value out of it at all because it's immune to it.
That Celesteela switching out on Baris' side of the field, and Arcanine taking its place. Arcanine with that Intimidate ability, more than happy to lower the attack stat of Zheyuan's Garchomp. And hey, Garchomp going to protect this turn, does not want to take a Dazzling Gleam or some other kind of fairy attack from Baris' Tapu Koko, who fires off a Volt Switch into Zheyuan's Tapu Koko. So Baris totally switching it up this turn, you know, manually switching out that Celesteela for the Arcanine, and now using Volt Switch to return his Tapu Koko safe to his party and send out the Garchomp on the field in its place. Zheyuan's Tapu Koko finally able to get an attack using Volt Switch of its own into that Arcanine, giving Zheyuan a chance to possibly bring back his own Arcanine and intimidate both that opposing Arcanine and the Garchomp. We'll have to see what he decided to go with.
Yeah, bringing in the Arcanine of his own is huge here. As soon as Baris has switched in his Garchomp with that Volt Switch, then the Arcanine comes in from Zheyuan, and then he's able to get an Intimidate down on it immediately. Interesting to note the order, of course, of the Volt Switches there. That's something that gives an indication on the speed of these Pokemon, and that's something I think is going to be very interesting for these players. It looks like they've probably bought a very similar team. At least 3 of the Pokemon are identical. We haven't seen the 4th Pokemon from Zheyuan yet, and that's going to be information he may want to conceal until the very last moment. Now with all 4 of his Pokemon revealed, Baris has given up a little bit of information to Zheyuan, which he can use and figure out the plays. If he knows something's going to switch, he then has an inkling, at least a 50-50 shot, of predicting what's going to come in. So if it's switching through Volt Switch or a manual switch because it's scared of its position on the board, then it's in a really, really good position to make those calls.
Garchomp going for a Rock Slide, moving first on the field, connecting with both the opposing Garchomp and the opposing Arcanine. Garchomp on Zheyuan's side of the field, happy to use Swords Dance to boost its attack by 2 stages and counteract that Intimidate from the previous turn. Arcanine with the Flare Blitz on Baris' side of the field will target down Zheyuan's Garchomp. Not very effective, but gets the burn to immediately lower Garchomp's attacking potential, in addition to deal some damage in between turns. Finally, Arcanine on Zheyuan's side of the field going for a Will-O-Wisp to burn the opposing Garchomp on Baris' side of the field. So, you know, an interesting turn. Basically the same outcome, I think, for both trainers.
Well, both players burned on their Garchomp, but We did see Zheyuan get that burn from the Flare Blitz, so we got a little bit of damage, and he got it after he'd set up the Sword Stance. So the Sword Stance really making up for the fact the burn came through, and that's going to be huge. That means the burn isn't so effective, and he's shown an interesting move in Sword Stance. That's something that Baris is now going to have to be a little bit afraid of, something I'm definitely concerned about. You know, if he gets it set up, there is going to be a problem. Of course, Baris's Garchomp moved before Zheyuan's. We don't know if that's an inkling about what is going on, maybe giving him a little bit of an idea, but once we saw the Z Crystal, of course, on that Tapu Koko, you have to wonder if Garchomp has a Z Crystal, or if Baris has decided to go for one of these Choice Scarf Garchomp varieties.
Arcanine leaving the field on both sides. Celesteela coming out for Baris, and Zheyuan sending in his own Celesteela.
We've got a mirror match.
It looks like you're looking at an exact mirror as Baris's Garchomp fires off another Rock Slide. Again, the first Pokemon to move. Garchomp on Zheyuan's side of the field will use Earthquake, so it will only connect with the opposing Garchomp, and it does a nice amount of damage. Celesteela on Zheyuan's side of the field is going to use Leftovers to heal up its health, and we still have no indication of what that Celesteela on Baris' side of the field is holding.
No, we really, really don't. And the interesting thing to go back to, of course, is that the Garchomp on Baris' side is still using that Rock Slide. Even with the burn, it's not switching out, and it's consistently moving, of course, before Zheyuan's. That's something I want to see, maybe a bit of information that he needs to give up. I want to see more out of that Garchomp, just so we can confirm the potential item on it, the potential set, the way it's been trained. All of this is such good information to gather, and I want to see how it comes to the fore in this game.
You know, what I find really interesting is that this is essentially a mirror game. We know both these trainers brought the same Pokemon, and now we're looking at basically the same 4 Pokemon. We know both the Garchomps are burned. We know one of the items on the Celesteela. It's a really interesting match. It might even come down to just what these Pokemon are holding, as Baris' Garchomp goes for yet another Rock Slide and yet again moving first. Zheyuan breaking the pattern, going for a Tectonic Rage.
And you've got to assume the Tectonic Rage is heading towards the Garchomp on Baris' side, not wanting it to keep going for those quick Rock Slides, and of course, not wanting him to get any flinches out from that side. So I think removing the Garchomp from play here, very, very smart if you're Zheyuan. Something I like to see is people identifying the threat, and after a little bit of the burn damage, a comfortable knockout from Tectonic Rage. The Celesteelas are going to start facing off against each other, and Baris is, interestingly, using an Air Slash to get a little bit of damage down, while Zheyuan's plays a lot more defensively, going for the Leech Seed on that opposing Celesteela. With the knockout coming through, though, on Baris' side of the field, switching around to avoid that Leech Seed becomes a little bit harder for him.
That's definitely true.
Although we do have to look at, of course, Zheyuan's Garchomp. Seeing that burn slowly wearing it down means it's probably done its duty here. It's managed to get that knockout with Tectonic Rage. Importantly, he got the knockout on the opposing Garchomp. And in this matchup, I think the Garchomp becomes exceptionally important for a number of reasons. If you remove the Garchomp from play, your Arcanine and Tapu Koko, which they both have, they have the same 4, are a little more freer to do some work. And that then means you can bring Tapu Koko in safely, because of course it can then deal with the Celesteela. It deals great damage to the Arcanine. And in the case of Baris' Garchomp, I think removing that from play becomes even more important. We saw it Rock Slide multiple turns, even after it had been burned. We've seen the Z Crystal over on his Tapu Koko, and that could be the difference between these two teams that sets them apart. With that potential Rock Slide flinch coming from a Choice Scarf Garchomp, that means he has the potential to Earthquake off a Choice Scarf. The way he played it safely early in the game gives me that indication that that's the focal point of his team.
Garchomp leaving the field, Tapu Koko taking its place on Zheyuan's side of the field. Celesteela will leave as well on Baris' side of the field, and that Arcanine will come back in its place. So potentially a great switch here by Zheyuan, avoiding the Intimidate on his Garchomp, meaning that it can come back in later and possibly deal a nice amount of damage to the Arcanine and the Tapu Koko. Celesteela protecting itself on Zheyuan's side of the field, that Tapu Koko on Baris' side of the field using Dazzling Gleam, so not able to attack the Celesteela, gets a little bit of damage down on the Tapu Koko.
Yeah, really looking to get the knockout on the Garchomp there, I think, and leaving that Celesteela unchecked, probably the wise decision. With the Leech Seed in play, he can expect the Protect coming out, and he wisely switches in his Arcanine, of course, to avoid that Leech Seed continuing to recover the health on the Celesteela. So being forced to switch, I think, is fine here, but getting his own Tapu Koko in, or Zheyuan getting his Tapu Koko in, is really, really wise. It is going to put a lot of pressure down on this Arcanine, particularly at the low amount of health it is. Should be able, in electric terrain, to pick up that knockout. Well, once that's dealt with, Celesteela is in a really bad position here, and it is going to be leaving the field because Arcanine and Tapu Koko are fantastic answers to it.
Arcanine out on Zheyuan's side of the field, trying to soak up one of those electric attacks from that Tapu Koko and intimidate the opposing Arcanine in the process. Tapu Koko going straight for a Thunderbolt into that Arcanine, activating its held item. Looks to be like one of those pinch berries, so it gets back half of its health. Zheyuan's Tapu Koko using Volt Switch to attack the opposing Arcanine, but it's not enough for that knockout. Again, activating the pinch berry so that it gets back half of its health. And Zheyuan is now given the opportunity to switch in something for that Tapu Koko.
This switch could be really important for him. If he can deal with the Tapu Koko, then he could really safely get his Garchomp in. That could be really important. And maybe his Arcanine's going to be following up with a Flare Blitz towards that Tapu Koko. A Flare Blitz coming out from Baris first, though. Flare
Blitz from Baris into the Garchomp. It's not very effective, but it gets a critical hit and is able to knock that Garchomp out.
Well, the Arcanine's going to take a lot of damage from both Rough Skin and Recall, meaning it's not going to be sticking around much longer, but it's now on Zheyuan to basically try and pick it up. Both the Garchomps have been exchanged as a Pokemon here, so that's something they've both lost in this one.
Yes, and again, we're looking at a mirror with the Tapu Koko and the Arcanines both out on the field, both on the same sides of the field.
Well, we are in a position here where both Pokemon, of course, have been kind of taken out of the Garchomp, and they have the same 3 remaining. What I think is going to be so important here is both player conserving their Tapu Koko. The Tapu Koko is the Pokemon you need last, after the Garchomp is gone, to deal with that Celesteela. If not, the Celesteela are going to end up trying to grind each other down. And as I mentioned a little bit in the sort of team preview section, the play with these Celesteelas, particularly when you're slow playing them, is so important. We saw a little more of an aggressive option in Air Slash from Baris's. Could be an indication of what item it's holding, but he really doesn't want it staring down a Tapu Koko.
Protect from the Arcanine on Baris' side of the field as Baris' Tapu Koko follows up with a Thunderbolt to attack the Arcanine. Zheyuan left attacking into the protecting Arcanine as his own Arcanine Flare Blitzes the opposing Tapu Koko.
Yes, that's really, really big. Seeing that Tapu Koko get taken down so low is important. And we do see here a couple turns ago, where we didn't get the knockout on the Arcanine from the Volt Switch. I understand he wanted to get the switch to make sure that the Garchomp came in and was able to take that Flare Blitz rather comfortably. But in the same vein, you know, if he'd have Thunderbolted, we saw how much more damage Thunderbolt does to something like the Arcanine in electric terrain. I do think this position is very, very balanced, and it may come down to which Tapu Koko moves first here and manages to get the knockout. We could end up seeing a very simple turn, of course, where this turn they exchange the Arcanines with the 2 Thunderbolts from those Tapu Koko, and then we're into the same position. It won't be needed a Thunderbolt to deal with Zheyuan's Arcanine, though.
Extreme speed from Baris' Arcanine for the knockout on Zheyuan's Arcanine as the Tapu Koko is left attacking into Zheyuan's Tapu Koko, who then fires off a Thunderbolt into the Arcanine, but Arcanine holds on, just barely left on the field with enough energy for one more extreme speed.
Yeah, you have to be wondering about Zheyuan's Tapu Koko here. Falling short on the amount of damage it's done a number of times now. The Volt Switch was just enough to activate that berry. Of course, this Thunderbolt wasn't enough to take the knockout. And now Zheyuan's basically forced in to showing his Tapu Koko already, and his Celesteela is in front of Tapu Koko and Arcanine. He needs to find a way out here, and I think Baris just dealing more damage throughout the sort of latter turns of this game has been so essential.
I don't know. This game is close. It doesn't look that close because it looks like, you know, Zheyuan, his Celesteela is at full health. His Tapu Koko is just barely hanging on, not going to take a lot of damage from that extreme speed. But if Tapu Koko doubles into it with the Volt Switch, no, that Tapu Koko on Zheyuan's side of the field is able to hold on for at least one more attack.
Yes, but Zheyuan's Tapu Koko will be going down if he doesn't get rid of the Arcanine in this turn. If he's throwing the Thunderbolt towards that slot, he he could be in a great position. Thunderbolt comes out, but it's towards the Arcanine, and that's going to be important. In the same vein, what his Celesteela decides to do here could be essential. A Heavy Slam is not the move he needed. A smart play to Volt Switch out by Baris to make sure his Tapu Koko is coming back in now.
Yes, but I think Zheyuan really wanted the Leech Seed onto the opposing Celesteela there to start, you know, this slow, stally Celesteela versus Celesteela game that I think we're going to see play out momentarily.
And I think he needed to get rid of that. The Volt Switch was so smart from Baris. The one thing I want to bring up is going back to the beginning of the game, where we pointed out that Zheyuan actually had the alternate color Tapu Koko. It hasn't been moving before Baris's. Baris's is still attacking first nearly every single time. And that's just something that you have to wonder about the training in it. Even though it has that timid nature, has he maybe invested in something else? It's been taking hits really well, and you have to think the Assault Vest Tapu Koko that we saw towards the end of the season, with those late regionals in North America, with the international championships in North America as well, the Assault Vest Tapu Koko was so popular. Tapu Koko, though, on Baris' side, playing it safe, doesn't want to go for Celesteela just yet.
Tapu Koko on Zheyuan's side of the field, though, is more than happy to fire off a Thunderbolt into the Celesteela as Zheyuan Celesteela uses Flamethrower to target down Baris' Celesteela for the knockout.
Yes, Baris being caught short there a couple turns ago where we didn't see that coming out from Zheyuan. He didn't make the correct predictions. This turn he does. He calls the Protect on Tapu Koko, and then he ends up basically being able to get his Celesteela a nice Beast Boost. Of course, we do see Zheyuan having to be careful with his Tapu Koko, and I think some smart play here is going to be important. Big damage, though.
Thunderbolt from Tapu Koko on Baris' side of the field for the critical hit, knocking out Zheyuan Celesteela in one hit. Tapu Koko from Zheyuan uses Thunderbolt into the opposing Tapu Koko, but it falls short.
And this is something that we have to wonder about Zheyuan's Tapu Koko. He's gone against the field, against the grain in this one. And while people have been playing a lot more Tapu Koko, even though he has the alternate color, he just hasn't been moving first, and he's going to fall in a one-on-one against Baris' Tapu Koko. Baris' Tapu Koko has been doing so much more damage.
That was a dazzling gleam to wrap up Game 1. Baris taking it one win closer to winning this round. But overall, those trainers were just neck and neck throughout the entirety of this game.
It was so close. And I do think there's something very interesting in this game with how they've been trained. We saw, of course, Baris' Celesteela took a Thunderbolt very well. And of course, you know, followed up by a Flamethrower. It needed those two attacks. It was great that Zheyuan called it, but the one thing I've got to question on Zheyuan's team is that Tapu Koko. It just doesn't seem to be dealing as much damage as Baris is, and this is something we talked about before we even got this game on stage. The players that feel comfortable are going to be able to eke out these wins, and it was a real good show of how a tournament can run for people, because how they did it, they played slow at the start. They exchanged things a lot. They exchanged Intimidates. They tried to get a better position for their Arcanine. And in the same vein, you know, after that happened, after the Arcanines fell, it really came down to who could do more damage. And with the more offensive Tapu Koko, I feel that's what gave Billa the edge. He's clearly very comfortable in his team selection, immediately locking it in.
Yeah, Baris, I have to wonder if he's going to bring the same 4 Pokemon. Seeing how that played out for him, he knows that his Tapu Koko can deal more damage and get the knockouts that it requires. He has plenty of information about the opposing Celesteela, the opposing Garchomp. He knows that it's holding the Z Crystal. If he's holding the Choice Scarf, maybe he has something to help that matchup better. You really have to wonder for Zheyuan, since that match was so close, do you mix things up, or do you run the same 4 and just try and play better and maybe not rely on your Tapu Koko as much for knockouts?
So I think this is, of the 4 Pokemon they both bought, I think this is like a classic 4, and the other 2 are kind of specialist adaptations that you bring in certain matchups. The way Baris locked in very quickly, you do have to wonder if he's just going to take the same 4. While they are a premium 4, he may feel very confident in their play. We do see the identical lead, and I think the onus is on Zheyuan here to really switch it up. He has switched up the lead a little bit here, but I don't know if it's the right adaptation.
Yeah, Tapu Koko, Arcanine out on Baris' side of the field, Tapu Koko and Garchomp out on Zheyuan's side of the field. That Garchomp immediately falling victim to the Intimidate from that Arcanine. We know that the Garchomp is holding the Z Crystal, so a Tectonic Rage here could possibly get a knockout on that Tapu Koko, maybe deal a nice amount of damage to that Arcanine, but you really don't want your Garchomp to be intimidated right out of the gate.
No, that's a really rough start for this Garchomp, and that's something I enjoyed in the previous game. Of course, bringing the Garchomp in and trying to find an opening for it. Showing your hand this early, I think, makes it a little bit difficult to use Garchomp, and with the way they bought the Mirrored 4 in Game 1, that kind of gives Baris a bit of information. He can feel pretty confident that that's going to be a similar 4 from Zheyuan and make that prediction. Garchomp here would be able to do a lot of damage with an Earthquake, but that gives away so much information. You'd have to protect Tapu Koko, you'd have to hope you didn't get caught by anything, and because of that, it's forced to switch out. If Baris predicts this could be huge.
Arcanine taking the place, and Baris looks happy about that switch. Even though the Arcanine is intimidated, it could be a sign that he was able to make a play here to take advantage of that fact. Arcanine with the Protect on Baris' side of the field, and Baris' Tapu Koko using Volt Switch into the opposing Tapu Koko. So a very safe play, but I think that was exactly what Baris is looking for, allowing himself to send in potentially his own Garchomp now, not having to worry about being intimidated and not having to worry about that Arcanine otherwise burning the Garchomp before it has a chance to attack. And Zheyuan's Tapu Koko is left attacking into that Garchomp.
Yeah, again, Zheyuan not able to get any value out of that Tapu Koko. Very, very smart. Baris using this Volt Switch from his faster Tapu Koko so well. It's so interesting to see him do it again, and he's in that perfect position. I think the position that Zheyuan wanted to be in turn 1, where he has Garchomp facing off against both Tapu Koko and Arcanine. He has it, though, without his Garchomp being intimidated, and that's going to be forcing some certain plays here from Zheyuan.
Garchomp taking the field for that Tapu Koko, as Baris' Arcanine will leave the field as well. The Celesteela taking its place, so Baris running all 4 of the same Pokemon. Zheyuan switching out the Arcanine into the Celesteela, so now could be a time where we see Baris' Garchomp using some sort of ground-type attack. It's that Earthquake into the opposing Garchomp.
Yes, and this, I think, is the confirmation that we needed of the Choice Scarf on the Garchomp. He is locking into Earthquake. There's some juicy targets in play in Arcanine and Tapu Koko, but Zheyuan making a fairly safe switch, a double switch, actually getting them out. Celesteela, of course, being a great switch in. The Celesteela switch in from Baris kind of telegraphed, telling him that he needs something to Earthquake next to, and Baris may be forced to switch out Garchomp here to get a better time to Earthquake. Now is not a good time when you're just hitting a Garchomp, which is only taking neutral damage, so he may want to slow down the game a little bit with his Celesteela, try and set up some Leech Seeds perhaps, try and deal some damage with that Air Slash, get some flinches, which would open up a little bit of breathing room for him. But Zheyuan really needs to start predicting things like this Garchomp leaving the field. With it not being very useful right now, being stuck Earthquaking, he needs to think about that as he plays.
Garchomp on Zheyuan's side of the field uses Protect this turn, as Baris' Garchomp is left dealing no damage to any Pokemon on the field with that Earthquake. Celesteela as going to go immediately for the Flamethrower onto Baris' Celesteela, does a nice amount of damage and gets a burn in the process, which will immediately counteract the recovery from its held leftovers item.
Yeah, and Zheyuan playing into a really good option there, just keeping Garchomp protected, and Baris just being a little bit brash, I think, a little bit brave to keep Earthquaking. If that's your only kind of play right now, I think that's another indication of something that's coming up. Zheyuan can capitalize this on this again. Getting that damage and the burn down on the opposing Celesteela is huge for Zheyuan, and I'd love to see if he's able to capitalize on that. A potential Leech Seed this turn into the Garchomp slot could be really, really nice. A Leech Seed into the Celesteela slot could also be nice, because you have to think about the future of the game. And if Baris wants, of course, to Earthquake the Tapu Koko and Arcanine that Zheyuan has in the back, he's also going to need a partner that is appropriate to do it next to. And in this case, that would be Celesteela. So he may be forced to play that, or in this case, he's just trying to break through his Garchomp and force at least one of Arcanine or Tapu Koko onto the field.
Earthquake again from Baris' Garchomp, using that Choice Scarf to move first, as a Fire Fang from the Garchomp comes out on Zheyuan's side of the field into that Celesteela, who his own Celesteela follows up with another Flamethrower to just immediately knock Baris' Celesteela out.
Yes, that Celesteela going down is absolutely huge for Zheyuan because it limits the potential to Earthquake that Baris has. You don't want to Earthquake next to your own Arcanine or your own Tapu Koko. So that may mean the next turn Garchomp is forced to switch out, even though he's basically been Earthquaking for about 30% of Garchomp's health every single turn. That's really not the play you want to be making. There could be the forced switch here, and Zheyuan's in a good position to capitalize. He knows what the last Pokemon is, and getting something like a Leech Seed down, getting some big damage on an incoming Arcanine could be really, really big, because Zheyuan is actually in a position to Tectonic Rage. Of course, the Tapu Koko on Baris' side would be able to probably pick it up with a Dazzling Gleam at this low health. And maybe that's something Baris has played for, knowing that he just needed to get Garchomp low so that Dazzling Gleam would pick up the opposing Garchomp. He could then switch his out, and I think feel pretty comfortable in Rock Sliding. Rock Slide would do decently against Celesteela, do pretty well against Arcanine because it's weak to the Rock-type attacks, and of course, the Tapu Koko has the chance to flinch because it would be moving after. So that looks like something that Baris really has to think about, and he's going to get another opportunity to pick the move Garchomp is using.
Intimidate from that Arcanine, taking the field alongside with it, weakening the attack of that Garchomp and Zheyuan's Celesteela. Tapu Koko moving next on Baris' side of the field, using Dazzling Gleam to score the knockout on Zheyuan's Garchomp before it's able to use that Z move. Potentially knock out either that Arcanine or that Tapu Koko. Celesteela going immediately for the heavy slam into the opposing Tapu Koko to wrap up the turn.
Yes, only neutral damage coming out from that heavy slam, of course, because of the electric typing alongside the fairy typing on Tapu Koko. But the Garchomp, I think, being removed from Zheyuan's side is really, really important. That means this Arcanine and Tapu Koko combination we have on the field are in a great position. There's no concerns about using Gigavolt Havoc into a ground-type Pokemon, and that's something he could actually use with his Tapu Koko being guaranteed the fastest thing on the field. This turn, he's able to do some really, really big damage. Of course, we have seen the Protect on the Celesteela from Zheyuan. We didn't see it from Baris, so if we end up in Game 3, that could be vital information. But we do know if he can get rid of this Celesteela, that's something he needs to deal with so that his Garchomp could come in and just Earthquake all the way through this game. Even if he's taking out his partner, as long as he's picking up more knockouts on the other side, that's really big. So Baris' game plan now really relies on what he needs to leave for Garchomp to round out this game with the Choice Scarf.
I find it interesting that Zheyuan sent in his Arcanine instead of that Tapu Koko. It could be an indication that maybe Baris' Tapu Koko relies on something like the Electric Terrain to be able to deal enough damage to one-shot the Celesteela, as we saw in Game 1.
Well, we saw it do that requisite amount of damage with the Electric Terrain, but it does still have access to the Z Crystal, so the Protect here may be fishing for Protect on the Celesteela from Zheyuan's side.
And that's exactly what happens. So if Baris is looking to use that Z move, the next turn would probably be his best bet. Both Arcanines are left attacking into the protecting Pokemon.
Yes, and baiting out that Protect is such a smart play. It's a top-tier play that we see very, very regularly in the video game championships. Knowing that your opponent's going to Protect, you just keep your Pokemon safe from the partner, and that's fantastic play from Baris. Now he knows that Celesteela is either going to have to fish for a double Protect, which is pretty difficult. The Tapu Koko's coming in, which isn't going to appreciate the big damage coming out from something like a Gigavolt Havoc, and a follow-up Flare Blitz, for example, from Arcanine. Or he can just go for the Arcanine on Zheyuan's side, really not worried about that slot because he's forcing out that Celesteela potentially.
Celesteela gets the double Protect, only a 30% shot, so Celesteela feeling pretty lucky as Baris, no Z move, just attacking with both the Arcanine and the Tapu Koko into that Celesteela. Arcanine on Zheyuan's side of the field, Flare Blitz into that Tapu Koko, and it's enough for a knockout.
Yes, that's actually what he really, really needed, because he's forcing Baris to bring his Garchomp in immediately, and Garchomp's in such an awkward position right now. What it locks into is going to be essential. If he locks into Earthquake, he's basically relying on Arcanine not getting knocked out, which is a huge ask, and Arcanine being able to do enough with Celesteela on the field. So he's really having to look at Rock Slide as his option. Rock Slide isn't going to be doing that much damage to a nice bulky Celesteela. It's not going to be doing enough to get one-hit knockouts on anything, so he may have to fish for those flinches. It's not a glamorous way to play the game, but it's certainly one way to play, especially when you're in a bit of a pinch like this. I think Baris relying on this Garchomp is a really big ask of a Choice Scarf.
We've seen Garchomp with Choice Scarf pull it off in the past, though. I mean, even yesterday there was a situation like this where the Garchomp was able to use Rock Slide, get those flinches, and somehow pull out a win. So while it may not be the most glamorous way to win a game, if that is your win condition, you certainly try for it, as Rock Slide will connect with both Pokemon on Zheyuan's side of the field. Arcanine moving next with a Flare Blitz from Baris onto that Celesteela. Not enough for a knockout, but definitely puts it in range for something for the next turn. Zheyuan's Arcanine with the Will-O-Wisp into Baris's Garchomp.
Yes, and that's definitely a win condition for Zheyuan here. Limiting the amount of damage that something like that Garchomp can do is huge. Knowing it can take those Rock Slides comfortably is kind of on the downsides of playing Choice Scarf Garchomp. When you're forced into picking a move like this early, you're definitely in trouble. This turn, it's just not going to be able to pick up knockouts. It's probably going to activate the Berry on Zheyuan's Arcanine, and I don't see a way out for this Garchomp. Even if he manages to get through one of these Pokemon on the field, he's not going to be able to deal with Tapu Koko very quickly unless he gets flinch after flinch after flinch. Tapu Koko is going to weave in a couple of Dazzling Gleams. The build-up damage from that burn is also going to wear it down, and Garchomp just isn't going to be able to do enough. Unless this Arcanine can pull its weight a little bit more, I do see this going very much in Zheyuan's favor, and he's saving his Arcanine for another Intimidate.
Zheyuan sending in that Tapu Koko in that Arcanine's place, going to bring back the electric terrain, benefiting itself when it starts to attack the opposing Arcanine. Celesteela will protect this turn, not wanting to risk getting knocked out or flinching from that Garchomp's Rock Slide. Will connect with the Tapu Koko for a little bit of damage to help out the Arcanine on Baris' side of the field, who is left Flare Blitzing into the Tapu Koko switch-in.
Well, this is a really good sort of comeback turn, I think, for Baris. He got what he needed. I mean, he got a little bit of burn damage. There's a little bit of leftovers healing for Zheyuan. But getting that much damage down on Tapu Koko makes it a lot more manageable to deal with. The only problem now is going to be the Celesteela. I think he needs to look at it a little bit earlier so it doesn't heal back to full health with the leftovers, with that chip damage and recovery from Leech Seed on this Arcanine. That means Arcanine's also on a timer, so this turn he's going to need a Rock Slide that definitely gets a flinch on Tapu Koko, most importantly, because otherwise Tapu Koko can just pick up the Arcanine with something like a Thunderbolt, and then of course he's going to need to get something to stop that Celesteela, even setting up another Leech Seed. Zheyuan just playing it very, very safe and very, very smart at this time. This game has actually gone a little bit longer than our previous one.
Celesteela switching out, the Arcanine taking the field in its place, so intimidating that Garchomp, making it that much harder for the Garchomp and the Arcanine to score any knockouts to give Baris the momentum he needs to try and make this work. Extreme speed from the Arcanine into the Tapu Koko brings it down into the red. Rock Slide will connect with the Tapu Koko, but with the burn, with the intimidates, it's not enough for it to get knocked out, and it does not flinch, using Volt Switch into the opposing Arcanine, doing just enough damage to activate that Berry in a pinch, and giving Zheyuan a chance to return the Celesteela to the field.
Yes, bringing that Celesteela in is going to be great, because otherwise Tapu Koko was going to be knocked out. But Baris is not going down without a fight. While it looked bleak for his Garchomp, he was burned. He has been intimidated. That's something that, you know, is a good win condition for Zheyuan. Of course, he has to worry about the potential critical hit coming in. That could completely nullify all of this good work. And the recovery now ending up on the Arcanine, I think, is even more important for Zheyuan. Of course, if you switch into a slot that had been benefiting from Leech Seed recovery, the Pokemon that switches in actually gets the benefit of that. So now his Arcanine's recovering, and I do believe that little bit of recovery that we saw on Zheyuan's Arcanine is going to be enough to allow that Berry to activate a little bit easier. That's something that's so important. Unless there's some big critical hits here and a lot of flinches from Baris, he's still really up against it. Zheyuan may be slow playing it a little bit, just grinding out the game by recycling the Intimidates, making sure his Pokemon don't get knocked out, but it's certainly a way to keep the game under control.
It is, but you have the risk of Rock Slide coming in and doing its own thing. The longer you play the game out, the more turns and the more opportunities Rock Slide has for a flinch. But hey, if you use Protect, that's one way to ensure that you won't be taking damage and you won't be flinching. You'll just be slowly letting Burn and Leech Seed do their jobs to whittle down your opposing Pokemon's health.
I think it's very interesting to see Zheyuan play the game this slowly. There is a factor that we haven't touched on very much, I think, in this year, which is the timer. Now, if we look at the round timer here, while these little bits of residual damage come in and residual healing on both sides now, there is, of course, only 13 minutes left in the round, and we're still only in the end of Game 2. So Game 3 is going to have to be either very, very quick, or one Pokemon's going to have to eke out an advantage to get there. That's something I don't think either player is particularly aware of, with both of these teams really relying on the revolving door of Pokemon, getting those Arcanine Intimidates in, making sure you switch in Garchomp into those Thunderbolts and those big Gigavolt Havocs. It really slows the game down. And even more kind of safe play from Zheyuan, we do see the extreme speed to start the turn.
Missing the knockout on the opposing Arcanine, though. Tapu Koko taking the field just long enough to not get knocked out by that Rock Slide. It's just left hanging on. Arcanine on Baris' side of the field with the Flare Blitz into the Tapu Koko to finally knock it down. So we are down to 2 Pokemon left on each side of the field. Arcanine taking a little bit of damage from the Flare Blitz, and it looks like it'll just get knocked out by the Leech Seed.
Yes, this Garchomp is really, really up against it. I mean, the Arcanine on Zheyuan's side isn't going to be taking any more recovery from Leech Seed, but Celesteela can come back in and set that up. The one thing I'm interested in here, actually, is how long Baris plays this out for, due to the way that the round timer is running down so aggressively. I do believe we're going to be in a position where we're not going to complete Game 3, and you've got to wonder if you're Baris, do you just lock in for a forfeit and try and get into the next game? That's exactly what he's going to do, and Zheyuan is going to take Game 2.
I think locking into the forfeit there was his best bet. The most he could have done there was maybe play out a few more turns, get a couple of flinches, maybe whittle down a couple more minutes on the round timer. But looking at both their teams, they've played it so slowly, you can't help but wonder if they just plan on trying to, again, keep the same pace, keep it slow, and just hope that within the last couple of minutes of the round time, they can make maybe 1-2 big reads, use the Z move maybe to their advantage and get that knockout.
That was something we didn't see actually in that game at all. We saw no Z moves coming out, and it's such a key move to get that big damage down. I think in this game, which is going to be very, very limited on time, in previous years, of course, each game has been decided in a 15, 20 minute, it's been up in the air, depending on that, This game is going to be running to a real time limit, and that's something both players have to be aware of, lest they want to play a sudden death. One player at the end of the game, or the end of the time, is of course going to need to have a distinct advantage. If we end up in sudden death, which is very, very possible with both players running the exact same 4, that's going to be so exciting. Of course, for those of you at home who don't quite know how these rounds work, when we get to the end of time, we kind of mirror what the trading card game do. Something that I like to look at here, of course, is exactly how this one comes to the fore, in that when we hit the end of time, it's then turn 0 in the turn that is kind of playing out, the animations we're watching. Then we have +3 turns, so we get a little bit more Pokemon. And in those 3 turns, you have to eke out a distinct advantage. Of course, we look at very obvious metrics, such as the number of Pokemon remaining at the end of that time. Then we look at the percentage health that we have across both of the teams. And then, if we can't decide it there, we just take it to a sudden death. So both players really seem to know what they're going for here.
All right, it's another mirror lead from both Baris and Zheyuan, Arcanine and Tapu Koko. Arguably one of the most popular leads right now in the format, staring each other down, trying to run down that timer and eke out a win here in round 1 of Swiss at the Pokemon World Championships.
It's going to be so important to get that early advantage. And, they both have so much information on their opponent's team. That's really big to see if we can get it to that point. I do think that Baris has played a little more aggressively, and when we're in a timed game, that could be really important. But even though he played more aggressively in Game 1, we didn't see him go for that Gigavolt Havoc in Game 2, and that's something he may need to get the correct amount of damage down as we play out this game. So both players really could be hesitant to go for the big play, but I think with 8 minutes and 40-some-odd seconds on the clock, one of those big plays is going to be needed, and needed early. If you get it, you have to keep the advantage, though.
One has to wonder, we know Baris has his Z-move out on the field already. That if he's going to go for a big play, I think Z-move is pretty much the textbook definition of a big play right now. But if that Arcanine switches out and the Garchomp takes its place and Baris tries to use his Z-move on that Garchomp, that could be a great mitigation by Zheyuan. We see Baris go for the Z move dance. It's going to be that Gigavolt Havoc. The big question here is, did he target that Garchomp or did he target the opposing Tapu Koko?
This could be a big play or it could be an absolutely shocking play. In this case, not shocking at all because it goes towards the Garchomp. No damage coming out there. And interesting to see another move on Zheyuan's Tapu Koko, the Nature's Madness, doing exactly 50% of Garchomp's health. Baris getting no value out of that Z move.
Baris essentially wasting one of his biggest opportunities here to gain an early lead in terms of the Pokemon count and sort of keep the game going in his favor as we move towards, as this clock just slowly starts ticking down.
That's so important to see exactly how it comes to be. But Zheyuan getting 50% of the damage. We have to look at this game a little bit differently. Not only are knockouts going to be important, but also the amount of damage you deal is going to be absolutely essential. So that 50% of its health with Nature's Madness gives us pretty much the confirmation that he's running one of these Assault Vest kind of supportive Tapu Kokos. We saw the failed Sky Drop. We've seen the Nature's Madness. We've seen the limited damage coming out from it as well. So that's something that Baris is probably going to have to work a little bit harder to knock out, especially if he's trying to knock it out with something like his Tapu Koko. He needs Garchomp to come in now and start dealing the amount of damage. He's got it in, but his play may be telegraphed.
Arcanine on the field for Zheyuan, bringing that Intimidate just a little bit too late. Baris using Dazzling Gleam to attack both of the Pokemon on Zheyuan's side of the field. Zheyuan's Tapu Koko left attacking into that Garchomp and having no effect at all.
Both players only getting a little bit of damage down, a real pittance of damage, a smattering of damage across the board, and the time is ticking down. This is something I have to iterate in this game, iterate and reiterate, that it's so essential that there is a clear advantage for one of these players. Nobody wants to be relying on the hit point numbers. You don't have time to calculate it in this game, but the play's been so similar to game 1 and 2. The Garchomp with the Choice Scarf is essential for Baris. Zheyuan found an answer to it in game 2. He switched in the Garchomp and his Celesteela. The switch in, of course, for the Celesteela on Baris' side was telegraphed. And if he goes for it again, then maybe he could leave the Arcanine in, take an Earthquake, and get some good damage down on the Celesteela. So if we hit that really nasty end game, then he's able to just rely on having more damage dealt. We've got one part of it starting this turn.
Celesteela taking the field, Arcanine on Zheyuan's side of the field, going for a Protect as Garchomp on Baris' side of the field moves first and uses an attack to single target that Arcanine alongside the Tapu Koko.
Yes, a single target attack for Garchomp. So Baris, realizing his struggles, I think, with Earthquake, with Rock Slide in previous parts of this game, it's really a blessing and a curse. Yes, you get that boosted speed, but you also have to make the tough calls. And I think double targeting that Arcanine was him trying to cover that slot. So with Baris locking into a single target move on his Garchomp, you have to think he was predicting the Garchomp to come in from Zheyuan. If he had Dragon Claw and something that could follow up on it, then that would be a fantastic play. Maybe he was just covering his bases, so if Arcanine stayed in, he was going to get it with the Tapu Koko. And of course, if Garchomp came in, he was going to hit it with something like a Dragon Claw. Would have been a fantastic play there.
With no threat of Earthquake from that Garchomp, Zheyuan switches his own Garchomp in for the Celesteela, but Garchomp uses Dragon Claw to attack the Arcanine on Zheyuan's side of the field. Tapu Koko with the Thunderbolt follow-up for the knockout.
Yes, and that one knockout is going to be huge for Baris. That's something, as the time runs down, puts the game a little bit in his favor. But we do have to remember, both these players have a Celesteela, so even if they start really, really quickly trading knockouts, it could get really nasty. A very interesting pick to what he sends in here in place of that fallen Arcanine. He actually brings in the Tapu Koko. It means he's got Celesteela in the back, and to avoid that Dragon Claw on his own Garchomp, he needs to make sure that he makes that switch. Now that gives Baris the opportunity to switch out and pick again, but at the same time, you know, there's no Intimidate from Zheyuan, and we saw in Game 2 how important Intimidate was beating this Garchomp. This game is absolutely coming down to the wire, but Zheyuan needs a knockout now, and with his own Tapu Koko being bulky and supportive, I feel he may struggle to get that. He needs to make a big play, make a big prediction on how he can beat something from Baris' team, and the prediction, I think, is what is Baris' Garchomp going to do? Is it going to stay in and Dragon Claw, or is it going to leave the field?
It leaves the field, and in its place, we see Baris send out his own Arcanine to intimidate the opposing Garchomp and that Tapu Koko. So Zheyuan, he really needs to start dealing some sort of knockout here, but protect from the Garchomp will not be what he needs to accomplish that. Tapu Koko on Baris' side of the field uses Volt Switch into the opposing Tapu Koko, again giving Baris another opportunity to switch his Pokemon around to potentially bring back that Garchomp, take an electric attack from Zheyuan's Tapu Koko, and then be able to pick whatever move he wants to use with that Choice Scarf in the following turn. Garchomp does make an appearance back on the field, and Tapu Koko is left using Nature's Madness into the Arcanine.
Yes, and this Garchomp coming back in means it's immediately back on the field for next turn, and in the same vein, it's able to select another move on what it wants to go for. Of course, Earthquake would be very tempting here, but that telegraphs a couple of options for him. Either the switch in with the Celesteela here, or of course the kind of change to another move, something like a Rock Slide. A Protect on the Arcanine would also work here, but with the time, little over 2 minutes, 2 minutes 20-something seconds on the clock here, you have to wonder if Zheyuan has enough gas in the tank to really swing this game back in his favor. There was some very slow play that opened doors for him, slow and methodical play, not taking his time, but wearing down Baris' team. And even after the failed Z move, Baris has found the opportunities to take knockouts that Zheyuan just hasn't been able to capitalize on yet. I really have to question the Protect on the Garchomp the previous turn, because that was the turn he may have been able to take some knockouts. He's forced to play a certain game, and you have to wonder if Baris is going to play into that.
Celesteela taking the field for the Tapu Koko on Zheyuan's side, as Arcanine with the extreme speed into the opposing Garchomp, dealing a little bit of damage but taking a lot of damage in return thanks to that Rough Skin ability. Garchomp with the Dragon Claw into Zheyuan's Garchomp.
Holds on!
Garchomp holds on with just 1 health point and is able to go immediately for that Z move. This Tectonic Rage could be huge in giving Zheyuan the momentum he needs to finish this out.
Yeah, you have to wonder where this Tectonic Rage is going. It could be overkill, but whatever it does, it's going to level up the Pokemon count. If he's gone after Baris' Garchomp, knowing he can take something like the Dragon Claw, he's in a great position. It is Garchomp. It's going to be taking so much damage, and it's so essential that he removes it from play.
But Garchomp holds on!
It is out of play, but he now needs to keep his Garchomp around until Celesteela deals with it. Removing this Garchomp is essential for Baris, for Zheyuan against Baris. This is, we look at this timer, we do have to wonder, does Zheyuan have something in the tank here that could deal with this Garchomp? It would fall to a heavy slam, but in the same vein, Zheyuan has taken a lot of damage. His Garchomp has just 1 hit point remaining. And that's something that when it comes to that hit point calculation for the match resolution rules that we have, it's going to be so important. The Garchomp on Baris' side actually switching out, and if Zheyuan has called this, he could put himself in a great position by using his own Garchomp.
Well, unfortunately for Zheyuan, his Garchomp is leaving the field and the Tapu Koko is taking its place. Both of the Celesteela have made an appearance at this point in time, and with just 13 seconds left on the timer, this turn will be, I believe, the last turn before we start going into the match resolution rules. Extreme speed from the Arcanine into the Tapu Koko, and Celesteela protecting itself that turn.
Yes, what we're going to have is a couple more turns. Now the timer's up. We do see the judge having a quick chat with the players there. So they are going to be setting up. But the big thing here for Baris is he got his Garchomp out. And I think with the Pokemon so weak on Zheyuan's side, the Garchomp clinging on 1 hit point, this Tapu Koko, sitting there with just a little bit of health, it's so important that Zheyuan gets the value out of this Celesteela. Now that's going to be so difficult for him right now, especially with the Pokemon Baris has on his side of the field. Every single turn matters, but the pressure's really on Zheyuan to find an opening here. He can't switch in his Garchomp at any time, really. But if his Garchomp faces off against the other Garchomp, he needs to make sure he has something to try and deal with Baris's, because he knows Baris's can't protect.
Arcanine with the Protect this turn, not wanting to get knocked out. Celesteela as well. Baris more than happy to play down the turns to ensure that he keeps having the Pokemon advantage. Zheyuan left doing nothing at all.
Yeah, very smart play from Baris. He's got the game all wrapped up, and again, Zheyuan has potentially 1 more turn to take some knockouts, and he also has to take those knockouts without losing any Pokemon on his side of the field. So this is something that I think Baris really played to his win condition, probably having an information kind of, not advantage, but just a good awareness of the information in the game, knowing roughly where the timer was at for this game, knowing that this game wasn't going to be resolved by a complete set of knockouts. That was so essential. But the Tapu Koko on Zheyuan's side does start with a Thunderbolt.
And it gets the knockout on the Arcanine, not falling short this time around. Celesteela with the heavy slam into Baris' Celesteela, possibly an assurance that the Arcanine would get knocked out no matter what happens, as Celesteela on Baris' side of the field uses its own heavy slam to knock out the opposing Tapu Koko.
Yes, and even though Baris drops a Pokemon, he does take another knockout. We do see Baris raising the fingers there, just confirming what turn we were on in this game. But interestingly enough, we have Celesteela versus Celesteela. So depending, of course, on what Baris brings and what Zheyuan brings, could be very interesting here. I believe, and this is the last turn, or turn 2, so we 1 or 2 more turns remaining. We see Zheyuan bring his Garchomp. We see, of course, the Tapu Koko come out from Baris, and I think that's the right decision here. That's going to be really important. So this is turn 2 of 3, is what I'm hearing over my headset, and that's so essential. Being able to deal big damage to the Celesteela is so important, of course, for this game. We do see, though, players not going to time, and the forfeit locked in from Zheyuan, realizing he had no way out, making our lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, that was so exciting, though. You know, the turn going down all the way to the wire, turn 2 of 3 in terms of the match resolution. No sudden death this time around, but it was so close.
It really was, and the play quality there. That game, because they bought identical 4 Pokemon, not quite the team selection,